It was the end of the 1940s, and Termite Terrace was a radically different place than it was at the start of the decade. The animation studio situated on Warner Bros. Sunset Boulevard lot had entered the decade as a studio staffed by animators with everything to prove. Young guys crammed into a ramshackle old building playing juvenile pranks on each other while honing their craft and creating some of the funniest and most memorable cartoon shorts and characters of the decade. By the end of said decade, the atmosphere had changed. New management, tighter budgets, and the switch from 4 directorial units to 3 were all factors. The departures of Tex Avery and Bob Clampett had also robbed the studio of its fun-loving atmosphere of yesteryear. But also, the young guys at Termite Terrace weren't young guys anymore. They all had grown up, got married, had kids. The fun day job they had of being cartoonists had become exactly that, a day job. But even if things were a little more serious around the studio, Termite Terrace was still spinning out gold. The directors and their animators were churning out hit short after hit short, whether they starred newcomers like Sylvester and Tweety, Pepe Le Pew and Foghorn Leghorn, or the established talent like Porky Pig, Daffy Duck, and their biggest draw, Bugs Bunny. And yet, from the outside looking in, it felt like none of them got the credit they deserved. Sure, their names were listed in the opening credits of nearly every Warner Bros. Short, but to the media, it felt like it was the studio itself that was pumping out these shorts. When Tweety Pie and For Sentimental Reasons won their respective Oscars, it wasn't Friz Freleng nor Chuck Jones that got up to receive those awards. It was always the producer, Eddie Seltzer. This perception was made all the more evident on Christmas Day 1949, when the news broke that former Termite Terrace producer Leon Schlesinger had died of a viral infection at the age of 65. Around the country, newspapers pressed glowing obituaries detailing his contributions to animation and film. Some would even claim that Schlesinger was, erroneously, the creator of Bugs Bunny. There was no mention of the artist who had actually did all the work. To the press and the public at large, the one who created the Warner's biggest cartoon star was the guy who had only financed the shorts. It would be a while before the artists at Termite Terrace received the recognition they deserved from outside and inside the film industry. But it was the work of one of the 3 directors remaining at the studio that helped that recognition bear fruit. He had been perpetually honing his skills as an artist ever since he received his director's chair in the 30s, and throughout the 40s he used his skill to craft some of the best and classic Warner Bros. Shorts. But he knew he could never rest on his laurels for a single second. A true artist's ambitions knows no bounds, and he was determined to keep the Looney Tunes shorts fresh and interesting at all costs. The 1950s would belong to one man and one man alone, Chuck Jones.
Okay, Smokey, roll 'em. And now if you'll all be quiet, we'll start the show. Chapter 1. Once upon a time. Great opening, huh? Who? Disassociated Press? The public has been demanding my life story? Is there no way of getting that kid out of bed?
Near the end of the 40s, Bugs Bunny's status as the top A-lister of the Warner Bros. Cartoon shorts had become unquestionable. He had been molded into the perfect cartoon specimen since the decade started, and by 1950, the men at Termite Terrace had settled into their niche in how they used him. Bob McKimson was comfortable in portraying Bugs as the smart-mouthed blue-collared everyman, having to outsmart his way out of comical situations. Friz Freleng mostly enjoyed having Bugs matching his wits with foul-tempered antagonist Yosemite Sam. Chuck Jones, meanwhile, had his Bugs Bunny formula centered around the Wabbit facing down a revolving door of stronger, meaner galoots, and always coming out on top. However, unlike his 2 colleagues, Chuck felt that repetition was the death of art, and he needed to put Bugs in fresher situations to keep his shorts from becoming stale.
How do? Welcome to my shop. Let me cut your mop. Let me save your crop.
One example of Jones's innovations is the 1950 short Rabbit of Seville. Jones took what would have been a simple Bugs vs. Elmer short and set all the gags to the rhythm and melody of the Rossini opera Barbara of Seville. Cal Stallings' musical arrangement works in tandem with the humor of the shorts. The music is not just an accompaniment, but an integral part of making the gags work in the first place. Jones, however, knew that a short of this type couldn't be repeated, at least not yet anyway. Still searching for new scenarios to put Bugs Bunny into, he turned to the cartoon stars that came before. Anyone with eyes could tell that Bugs' status as the main Warner Brothers cartoon star ended up pushing his predecessors to the sidelines. Porky Pig's straight man shtick had become completely passé by the late 40s, and the writers and directors made it no secret that it was time to move on from him as a leading man. Jones would direct the final short that had Porky as the main star, The Wearing of the Grin. After its release in July of 1951, Porky would now be relegated to second banana roles from that point onward. Daffy Duck, meanwhile, was another story. He was still being utilized as either a leading star or an antagonist for Porky, but it was still clear that the little black duck had taken a back seat to Bugs Bunny in popularity. Chuck Jones took note of this. He and Maltese had been playing around with his character and seeing how he could perform outside the musty heckler archetype, such as having him be a sadistic game show host.
Well, I don't know, Don't be a sucker, chum. The next question's a snap. You'll be sorry!
But Jones and Maltese really struck a chord with Daffy's character in the 1950 short, The Scarlet Pumpernickel. Drawing from his spotlight-stealing behavior from You Ought to Be in Pictures, Daffy is portrayed as an egocentric actor trying to break out of comedy and pitch a dramatic passion project of his with him as a star.
And it just so happens that I have with me the very script that we've been looking for.
Yes, but
Let's see now, where to begin? Oh yes, page 1. The Scarlet Pumpernickel by Daffy Dumas Duck.
Jones had been playing around with Daffy as this flawed, self-seeking anti-hero for a while now, but him being this fragile narcissist desperately seeking the spotlight, combined with Bugs' popularity skyrocketing past Daffy's, it gave Chuck an idea. Why not pit the former resident screwball of Warner Brothers against the current resident screwball of Warner Brothers?
Wabbit season! Duck season! Wabbit season! Wabbit season! Duck season! Fire!
1951's Rabbit Fire saw the first time Bugs and Daffy shared the screen as major players in conflict with each other. The short, focused on Daffy's many botched attempts at getting Elmer to shoot Bugs, is one of Jones's more important works. Instead of entirely having the cartoon be centered around physical gags, the crux of the short's humor is based around dialogue and wordplay, all of which is punctuated by Daffy getting shot in the face.
Where do you get that duck season stuff? Says so right over there on that sign. You're so smart. You know what to do with that gun, Doc.
It might seem standard now, but back then, Jones and Maltese were taking a huge gamble by pairing Bugs and Daffy with each other in a single cartoon. Both characters were huge cartoon personalities, and one character could have easily overtaken the other, turning a Bugs and Daffy cartoon into either a Bugs cartoon or a Daffy cartoon. Animation historian Michael Barrier likened it to acrobats performing without a net. But the gamble paid off handsomely. Rabbit Fire's success allowed Jones to revisit the premise in two other shorts, 1952's Rabbit Seasoning,
And if he was a rabbit, what would you do? Yeah, you're so smart. If I was a rabbit, what would you do?
well,
Not again.
and 1953's Duck Rabbit Duck.
Shoot me again. I enjoy it. I love the smell of burnt feathers and gunpowder and cordite. I'm an elk. Shoot me. Go on. It's elk season. I'm a fiddler crab. Why don't you shoot me? It's fiddler crab season.
All three shorts would, in retrospect, be known as the Hunting Trilogy. Historians posit that it was the Hunting Trilogy that marked the shift in Daffy's character from errant screwball to vainglorious schemer. But another Jones short that helped seal that change was 1951's Drip Along Daffy. A parody of popular westerns, the short has Daffy, cast as a western-type hero, act as sheriff for a one-horse town and try to take down notorious outlaw Nasty Canasta. This is a short that illustrated the difference between Daffy and Bugs. Canasta is the archetypical galoot and obviously someone that Bugs Bunny could take on no problem. But here, Daffy is clearly shown to be out of his depth dealing with him and is foiled at nearly every turn.
mine. Now we had a little whim.
The short is also known for introducing a different dynamic between him and Porky. Before, Porky was just another pigeon for Daffy to harass. Now, Porky entered the role as the eager, ever-loyal sidekick to Daffy, but one who was always far more competent than his boss. This character dynamic was what Chuck stuck with through the rest of his career as an animator, but it would be perfected in 1953's
Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century.
Opting for a parody of space serials, the short has Daffy completely at the mercy of Marvin the Martian, always being conquered in spite of his heroic swagger and failing to retain any sort of dignity in the process.
Little does he realize that I have on my disintegration-proof vest. You may fire when ready, Grizzly.
Chuck Jones and Michael Maltese had nailed down what they wanted to do with the duck, and now they were free to take his low character to new heights. New postmodernist heights.
Stand back, musketeers! They shall sample my blade! Touche! Musketeers? My guard, my blade?
1953's Duck Amuck is one of Chuck Jones's peaks as a director. It is the most thorough breaking down of the very concept of the animated shorts, with the conflict not being Daffy against Bugs or some other oafish villain, but Daffy against the animator themselves.
Buster, it may come as a complete surprise to you to find that this is an animated cartoon, and that in animated cartoons they have scenery, and in all the years I...
Daffy, who in this short just wants to do his job and shoot a cartoon, is continuously tormented by an uncooperative cartoonist. As the short progresses, Daffy goes from reasoning the cartoonist, to shouting at the cartoonist, to begging and pleading with the cartoonist.
All right, let's get this picture started. No!
According to Jones, one of the goals of Duck Amuck was to showcase the strength of Daffy's personality. Take away the setting, he's still Daffy. Take away his voice, he's still Daffy. Turn him into this thing, he's still Daffy.
Hey! You know better than that!
That was Jones's greatest strength, characterization. Through Jones, the characters of the Looney Tunes shorts were able to break out of their archetypical molds of being screwballs and hecklers and became fully realized characters with their own nuanced personalities. This approach to prioritizing characterization over physical comedy led to some of Jones's best shorts of the 50s, an example being 1952's Feed the Kitty, a short centered around a big tough bulldog named Mark Anthony adopting a tiny kitten and trying to keep it a secret from his owner.
What have you got in your hand? Give it to me this instant. Now I have seen everything.
Jones's character layouts were also the secret sauce to his shorts' humor. Not only were they intricately timed, aided by talented animators like Ken Harris, but the drawings themselves conveyed expressions that were on their own subtle but naturally funny.
Who is it that lifts me and holds me tight and says, "There, there, little man, everything is all right. My paw."
But Chuck's grandest contribution to animation history in this era came in the form of what was initially a one-off shorts. On September 17, 1949, the Chuck Jones short Fast and the Furious would be released into theaters. It just looks like your average chase cartoon with a skinny coyote chasing after an unfathomably swift roadrunner. But according to Chuck, there was more than meets the eye with this short. Mike Maltese was the writer for this. We were talking about crazy chases like aardvarks chasing wildebeest. Actually, we were trying to do a takeoff on chases, because everybody was chasing everybody, including all our stuff. What made Fast and Furious a riff on the age-old chase cartoon was it wasn't the roadrunner that outwitted and foiled the coyote. Rather, it was the coyote who outwitted himself. Throughout the short, the Coyote is bested by the various contraptions and gadgets he obtains through the fictional and ironically named mail order company, Acme. Despite these painful setbacks and against better judgment, the Coyote never gives up, probably because his gizmos almost work.
Meep, meep. Meep, meep. Meep, meep.
By 1952, the Coyote would be given a name and a voice in the Bugs Bunny cartoon Operation Rabbit.
Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Wile E. Coyote. Genius.
Wile E. Coyote would only have a voice in these shorts he starred in with Bugs. For his main shorts with the Roadrunner, he would remain completely voiceless. As Jones and Maltese made more Roadrunner shorts, Jones began to dictate a list of rules that made for the ideal cartoon. Rule 1. The Roadrunner cannot harm the Coyote except by going beep beep. This was a rule that Chuck broke in early shorts, but it was figured out quickly that the Roadrunner fighting back only makes the harm done to the Coyote feel redundant. Rule 2. No outside force can harm the Coyote, only his own ineptitude or the failure of the Acme products. Rule 3. The Coyote could stop any time if he were not a fanatic. Wile E. Coyote was never portrayed as an idiot, but as someone who just had rotten luck. Not only does this keep the audience's sympathy with him, but it also makes for a good reason why he doesn't give up. His luck has to turn around sometime. Rule number 4. No dialogue ever except beep beep.
Meep, meep.
Exceptions to this rule were the occasional yowls of pain by the Coyote, and if the Coyote were to speak, he would just respond with holding up a sign. Rule number 5. The Roadrunner must stay on the road, otherwise, logically, he would not be called a Roadrunner. It should be noted that out of all the rules, this was the one Jones broke the most. Rule number 6. All action must be confined to the natural environment of the two characters, the Southwest American desert. Layout artist Maurice Noble's gorgeous picturesque backgrounds of the Southwest desert were instrumental in giving the Roadrunner shorts their identity, so this rule had to be followed to a T to keep the Roadrunner shorts Roadrunner shorts. Rule number 7. All materials, tools, weapons, or mechanical conveniences must be obtained from the Acme Corporation. Rule number 8. Whenever possible, make gravity the Coyote's greatest enemy. And finally, rule number 9. The Coyote is always more humiliated than harmed by his failures. Of course, these rules were not set into stone. In fact, Michael Maltese even said that he had never even heard of these rules and just brushed them off as things Chuck wrote down during post-production. Of course, Chuck was not the end-all, be-all. There were still, after all, two other directors and their units operating in the same building. Friz Freleng was still producing good, if not great shorts, and while certainly not as ambitious as Jones, he and his team still made tweaks to make their cartoons better. Many of these tweaks could be seen in him improving his Sylvester and Tweety cartoons. Tweety's initial malice had been sanded down, and he became more of an innocent defending himself from the bad old Putty Tats. And while he would actively fight back in defense, Tweety would mostly rely on outside obstacles to bring comedic harm to Sylvester. One of these obstacles, introduced in the 1950 short Canary Row, would end up being the biggest thorn in Sylvester's side: Granny. Outside of the Sylvester and Tweety shorts, Freleng's unit still put out top quality Bugs Bunny Yosemite Sam shorts. By the 50s, storyman Warren Foster had become a permanent fixture of Friz's unit. He introduced more elaborate setups to the Bugs shorts to make them feel less like a string of gags. Examples include 1950's Big House Bunny, where Bugs accidentally digs himself into the state prison and has to deal with Sam, here an overzealous prison guard, in order to get out of prison.
Oh, no, I'm not. I'm outside. You're inside.
I am? Well, then get in here!
In 1951's Ballot Box Bunny, where Bugs and Sam are running for mayor of a small town and go to war with each other using very violent campaign tactics.
Boom, you stupid rabbit! Like this!
All the the shorts were benefited greatly by Hawley Pratt's excellent and impressive layouts. And, of course, Friz Freeling's mastery over timing a gag was as strong as ever.
Those little things can't hurt you. It's the big ones you gotta look out for.
Meanwhile, Robert McKimson and his unit continued to produce shorts in the typical screwball string of gags style. McKimson did feel like the least ambitious of the Termite Terrace directors, preferring to find his lane and stay in it for as long as he could. The formula for his Foghorn Leghorn shorts stayed relatively the same. And even with the Jones-dictated shift in personality, McKimson was clearly not comfortable with portraying Daffy as an irritable anti-hero. Instead, Daffy and McKimson cartoons would either be a slick conman or an antisocial pest causing trouble for Porky.
Now that was a bright thing to do.
McKimson also did Sylvester cartoons, but instead of him trying to feast on a canary, he instead pitted him up against a baby kangaroo named Hippity Hopper, whom Sylvester mistakes for a giant mouse. His attempts to catch the mouse usually ends with him beaten up and humiliated in front of his own son, Sylvester Jr.
Father, what kind of a father have I that won't back his little son up?
The gags McKimson and storyman Ted Pierce made were purely physical in nature, and were wielded like blunt instruments. But they were still funny gags because they were animated with such fluidity and form that it made the jokes hit stronger.
Grab a fence post, hold it tight, whomp your partner with all your might. Hit him in the shin, hit him in the head, hit him again, the critter ain't dead.
McKimson's unit consisted of some of the best animators that had come from Bob Clampett's and Art Davis's dissolved units, and the skills that they had developed there transferred nicely. McKimson's cartoons of the early 50s would not be as well regarded today had it not been for the animation of Rod Scribner, Emery Hawkins, and his own brother, Charles McKimson, which was sorely needed. McKimson, as strong of an artist as he had been over the years for Termite Terrace, had allowed his layouts to grow bland and stiff. It's unknown if this regression of style happened because of the increasing budgetary constraints, lapsed standards in the industry, or if he was just on autopilot after spending 20 years in the business. But even though Freeling and McKimson were producing quality work around this time, Jones was outpacing both of them by a country mile. He hadn't even reached the peak of his creativity and was far from burning out. His ambition can also be attributed to him being the studio malcontent. Jones was uncompromising in his vision and did not play well with others who would try to work against him. If Eddie Seltzer came into his office and said that he couldn't do a bullfighting cartoon, Jones would take that as the green light to do the best damn bullfighting cartoon of all time. But even if all three directors and their units shared the same ambitions, unbeknownst to them, their collective careers were about to hit one hell of a roadblock. In spite of all the money, accolades, and prestige it brought to both the studio and the entire field of animation, there was one tragic fact that belied Termite Terrace's success. The Looney Tunes brand was severely undervalued by the Warner Bros. Studio brass. Leon Schlesinger and Eddie Seltzer's commitment to keeping the noses of the boys upstairs out of the business of their cartoonists had almost worked too well. Studio head Jack Warner and his inner circle were completely ignorant of Termite Terrace's inner workings. Allegedly, Jack Warner didn't even know where Termite Terrace was on his own studio lot. And while this ignorance among the studio heads had been beneficial in letting the Looney Tunes shorts develop into what it was and is today, at this point in time, such disregard for the animation division was fatal. The 50s were not a good time for Hollywood. Movie theater attendance had been on a steady decline from 1946 onwards. This was due to the post-war economic boom causing families, most of whom were white, to move out of the inner city and into newly developed suburbs. This meant people could no longer walk a few blocks to go see a movie. The federal government was also cracking down on the film industry for antitrust activities. Up until the 50s, studios owned their own movie theaters and held exclusivity rights on which theater could show which movies, thereby giving each studio their own anti-competitive monopoly. But in 1948, the United States government filed a lawsuit against Paramount Pictures, which ended up putting an end to this practice as well as the old Hollywood studio system. And on top of all of this, there was the McCarthy hearings stirring up distrust of Hollywood as a bed of communism, and the subsequent studio blacklisting negatively affecting Hollywood's talent pool. In short, the 1950s saw the end of the lavish golden age of Hollywood. Out of all the studios, Warner Brothers was the one hit the hardest by this downturn, suffering a 90% decline in revenue in just 6 years. The studio was scrambling to make up for lost business by any means necessary, whether it be by trying out new gimmicks or cutting costs, and Termite Terrace was on the chopping block. The animation industry had also been in a state of decline around this time. By the start of the 50s, many studios who had once been at the forefront of their medium had become complete shadows of their former selves. The old guard who had stuck it out with consistent quality were Disney, MGM, Walter Lantz Productions, and Termite Terrace. Unfortunately, Termite Terrace was about to be done in by a newfangled invention that was taking the nation by storm. An invention that was changing the movie industry as we know it. An invention that was gonna be the basket that Jack Warner put all his eggs into. 3D film. 3D film was one of the big new gimmicks movie studios conceived to get people going back to the movie theater, and Jack Warner bought into this new technology hard.
Stereovision 3D will synthesize before your eyes the terrifying reality of it all. In Stereovision 3D, House of Wax.
It was to the point where Eddie Seltzer had to mandate Termite Terrace to produce a 3D animated short. The patsy chosen for this experiment was the otherwise unremarkable Jones-directed Bugs Bunny short, Lumberjack Rabbit. And because this mandate was put in halfway through the short's production, it meant that the only 3D that was put in the film was the Warner Brothers shield at the beginning. There were plans to make the Sylvester Porky vehicle Claws for Alarm into another 3D shorts, but by that point the unthinkable had happened. On June 19, 1953, Warner Brothers shuttered their entire animation division. To Jack Warner and Company, animated shorts were just a money pit that had run its course, and it needed to be gone to make way for 3D movies, which of course would be around forever. Approximately 70 employees at Termite Terrace were let go, among them being Chuck Jones and most of his units. The remaining 10 employees, which included Friz Freleng and Warren Foster, were told to stay at the studio for an undisclosed amount of time. Warner Brothers would continue to run a backlog of shorts that had already been completed until they ran out around 1955. So with Termite Terrace closed and him being out of the job, Chuck Jones immediately had an idea of where he could go next as an animator. It was a studio that had been a backup plan of his for a long time.
Present Walt Disney's Disneyland.
When you wish upon a star.
Chuck Jones was going to Disneyland. Since the 30s, Jones always had a healthy admiration of Walt Disney. To him and many other animators of his generation, Walt was the reason the animation industry was the powerhouse that it was. He and his animators had helped uplift the art form from primitive scribbles to fine art in just a matter of decades. All of this in spite of the fact that Walt was an ardent anti-communist who fought against unions that named names for the House of Un-American Activities, while Chuck was a pro-labor lefty who had paraded a guillotine outside of Walt Disney's office. Those differences in politics got swept under the rug quickly when, after a month-long vacation, Jones phoned up Disney and asked if he had a job opening. After conferring with some staff members, Walt Disney told Jones to come on over. When he arrived at Walt Disney Studios, Jones expected to get the same creative control he had at Warner Brothers along with a heftier salary. However, Jones ended up working for the same salary he had at Warner Brothers, but now with even less creative control. On one hand, he didn't have to start from the basement like most creators. In fact, Walt teamed him up with Ward Kimball, one of Disney's most skilled animators and a personal friend of his, signaling a lot of trust towards him. On the other hand, he was quick to realize that Walt Disney Studio only really moved forward on projects with Walt's say-so. And because this was around the time when Walt was focusing most, if not all of his energy on his Disneyland project, it made work at the animation studio move very slow. This was made even more grating when the project Jones and Kimball were put onto was the film Sleeping Beauty, which at the time was stuck in a pre-production quagmire. It didn't take long for Chuck to figure out that maybe working at Walt Disney Studios wasn't for him. I worked on Sleeping Beauty and the beginning of the television show, but I couldn't adjust to waiting for Walt. The Disney people were raised that way and used to it. You'd finish a sequence and then you'd wait, maybe for weeks. 5 or 6 men just sitting around waiting for Walt to come around. When he did come around, he had already been there the night before when the plant was dark and looked at the boards, and everybody knew he'd seen the sequence, but they still had to show it to him as though he hadn't. After 4 months of mostly just sitting around, Jones voluntarily ended his tenure at Walt Disney Productions without getting credited on a single project. It is said that when Walt asked him if there was any job he would take to get him to stay at the studio, Chuck replied that the only job that he really wanted at Disney's was Walt Disney's. Chuck's timing could not have been better because as soon as the holiday season had passed, Warner Brothers reopened Termite Terrace on January 4th, 1954. The 3D film fad had gone away just as fast as it had came, and production resumed on animation shorts effective immediately. Chuck Jones was quick to return to his old job, which was easy thanks to his contract somehow still being valid. At a fundamental level, it's almost like the shutdown never even happened. The backlog of shorts made it seem like the studio was still pumping out cartoons like normal, and the quick turnaround after a few months of inactivity meant that there was hardly any noticeable gaps in production. But don't be fooled. The 1953 shutdown ensured Termite Terrace would never be the same. Out of all the 3 units affected by the shutdown, the one who was affected the most was Robert McKimson's. Unlike Jones's and Freeling's unit, who were laid off or reassigned in the studio system, McKimson was just flat out fired and his entire unit dissolved 2 months before the shutdown in the name of cutbacks. Also, unlike Jones and Freeling, who still had contracts to get them back in the studio lots, McKimson actually had to do some finagling to get his job back. While there is no official paper trail on how he got rehired, it is said that he had to take a pay cut in order to do so. This meant that he couldn't pony up the dough needed to entice the old members of his unit back, who were now spread throughout the industry. No more Rod Scribner, no more Emery Hawkins, not even his own kid brother Charles could or would come back. McKimson ended up having to animate the cartoons made upon his return by himself. The entirety of the 1955 short, The Whole Idea, was done entirely by McKimson. He would also end up doing around 80% of the animation in the subsequent shorts, Dime to Retire. He eventually was able to assemble a team of animators, but it hardly mattered at that point. Termite Terrace had taken budget cuts across the board, and it was the most obvious with the McKimson units. McKimson really was not used to working with designs and layouts that incentivized a flatter and more streamlined style. This causes a lot of the humor of the shorts to really suffer and lack any sort of oomph that would have been in an early McKimson shorts. There was also the fact that, at this point in time, McKimson was really starting to burn out creatively. He had been working consistently since 1930. The wear and tear of the industry was finally starting to get to him. The experience of getting fired and barely getting rehired also affected his output. It instilled him with the knowledge that his unit was always going to be on the knife's edge. If the revenue was on another downturn, he knew his unit would be the first to go. In spite of this loss of drive, McKimson did have a hand in creating one more Looney Tunes star. Making his debut in 1954's Devil May Hare, the Tasmanian Devil was a foe for Bugs unlike any other. Created by McKimson and former Art Davis writer Sid Marcus, the Tasmanian Devil was certainly the most dim-witted of the Rabbit's many nemesis, but he was also the strongest and the least patient. Even when Bugs outwitted him, Taz was quick to recover and give chase again.
That's dead.
What for you bury me in the cold, cold ground?
Devil May Hare was produced prior to the 1953 shutdown and made its theatrical debut as part of the backlog. When McKimson returned in 1954, Seltzer told him to not use the character as he was too obnoxious. Once again, Seltzer was wrong. After 3 years of no Taz, Jack Warner himself phoned Seltzer up and asked what the deal was. Apparently, he had been getting entire boxes of fan mail from kids and adults alike who liked the character and wanted to see more of him. It was proof that Mel Blanc could scream and grunt into a microphone and still make a classic character. After that, McKimson made 4 more shorts starring the Tasmanian Devil, including one that paired him up with Daffy. A unit that was faring a lot better than McKimson's unit was Frizz Freeling's. The budgetary restraints that were put into place after the shutdown meant little to Freeling, as he had always been the most economical director, able to smartly save time and money on a cartoon without it being immediately obvious. He had also retained most, if not all, of his animation and writing team, so he was not left in the lurch like McKimson was. Freeling continued making cartoons just like normal. He still continued to make new nemesises for Bugs to face off against, such as the gangster duo of Rocky and Muggsy.
Come, you heard what the boss said. Let me have it.
Oh, okay, but,
That's better.
I let him have it, boss, just like you said.
But Frizz's comfort zone was still the dynamic between Bugs and Sam. He and writer Warren Foster discovered that Sam, despite starting off as a rootin' tootin' outlaw, was very versatile in how he could be used in different settings. That's what made Frizz so adaptable in an era of lower budgets. Why design a new character when Sam could easily fit the role of a hungry castaway, a Roman legionnaire, or an Arab sheik?
Whoa, Camel! Whoa! Oh, come on, whoa! When I say whoa, I mean whoa!
Outside of the Bugs and Sam shorts, most of Freeling's shorts were more or less the same quality as the ones he had produced at the start of the decade, but there were still some exceptional shorts that his unit created. 1957's Three Little Bops was Frizz's grand return to the musical cartoon format that he had been neglecting over the past few years. The short was a jazz version of the Three Little Pigs story, where the pigs are now jazz musicians and the big bad wolf is a trumpet-playing square who just wants to get in on the act.
They stopped me before I could go to town, so I'll huff and puff and blow their house down.
The short is told in the style of a 12-bar blues rhythm that is continuous throughout the short, the music being composed by jazz composer and trumpeter Shorty Rogers, because of course that was his name. The same year, Frizz's unit also released Birds Anonymous, a landmark Sylvester and Tweety short where Sylvester tries to give up on eating Tweety and slowly begins to lose his mind out of withdrawal. What makes the short work is all thanks to Holly Pratt's layout work on top of Mel Blanc's dramatic performance as Sylvester.
Oh, Mr. Pudgycat, don't you like me anymore?
I think you're delicious!
However, the landmark accomplishment of Freeling's units was the creation of another new Looney Tunes star, one who would become very popular very fast.
Ole, arriba, arriba, andale.
Speedy Gonzales was actually not a creation of Frizz Freeling. His creator was actually Robert McKimson, and he had made his debut in the 1953 short Cattails for Two.
I like those fellows. All the time having fun.
After the shutdown, Freeling wanted to return to this character, but not before giving him a serious redesign. Holly Pratt removed a lot of the more stereotypical design elements like the slick back hair and the gold tooth, and dressed Speedy in a more traditional rural Mexican attire. Speedy Gonzales would make his official debut in the 1955 short of the same name. The short, centered around Speedy outsmarting Sylvester to get the cheese for his starving village, established what made Speedy such a unique Looney Tunes star. Most Looney Tunes stars were either comedic everyman figures or tricksters, but Speedy was unambiguously a heroic archetype. He was still a trickster, but not for his own benefit. His motivation was to purely help the mice of his village, and it made the pain and humiliation he caused Sylvester a true crowd pleaser.
Arriba, andale. Arriba, andale.
Speedy Gonzales earned Warner Bros. Its third Academy Award for Best Animated Shorts, so it was not shocking that Freeling was incentivized to do more shorts starring the fleet-footed mouse. But even if Freeling was doing well for himself, his animated ambitions still paled in comparison to Chuck Jones's. During the shutdown, Chuck's creative drive had not weakened one iota. If anything, his experience at Disney only strengthened it, and he had lots of new cartoon ideas that he wanted to bring to life. Jones looked beyond his own studio and Disney for inspiration. The studio he now wanted to emulate the most was the works of United Productions of America, or UPA for short. UPA was a studio founded in the wake of the 1941 Disney animator strike by numerous animators who left or were fired from the company. One of them was John Hubley, a layout artist who thought the ultra-realistic style of animation pioneered by Disney had constrained the animated medium. To UPA, animated shorts such as Jones's The Dover Boys represented the true future of the medium with its radical approach to character design and animation. But Hubley and others at UPA, including ex-Warner animator Bo Cannon, had thought that the violent slapstick approach to cartoons pioneered by Termite Terrace in the first place was not only played out, but had kept animation from being seen as true art. What audiences wanted to see was more smartly written cartoons that utilized a flat, stylized, abstract style of art direction and human characters to coincide with the human stories of their cartoons. It turned out that they were right. In the 50s, UPA completely dominated the animated film, and their influence on art direction was felt far and wide, inspiring the likes of Tex Avery at MGM and Ward Kimball at Walt Disney Productions. It was practically a given that they would also inspire Chuck Jones. Jones actually had a lot of experience working with UPA. Not only did he have friends in the industry working at the studio, but he and Friz Freleng had also done some off-the-books work for them in the late 40s. Chuck was basically borrowing the UPA style even before they got famous thanks to Maurice Noble's proficiency with abstract backgrounds. But Jones didn't just want to make cartoons with the UPA art style, he wanted to make cartoons with UPA stories. Jones still wanted to stick to the slapstick cartoons starring funny animals, unlike some artists at UPA who were very elitist towards those types of shorts. But he also agreed with the UPA philosophy that cartoons that told funny and abstract yet relatable human stories was the path forward for the cartoon shorts. He and Maltese fired off the first attempt at this type of short with 1953's Punch Drunk, where the populace of a small town reacts to the phenomenon of seeing a 5-inch tall elephant.
Well, Mrs. Swanson used to spank me hard, even when...
I think it all began when Father refused to take me to the circus.
But the short that gave Chuck his first real taste of success with this new direction was 1954's From A to Z, chronicling the daydreams of a young boy named Ralph Phillips. It was a short that really showed off Jones's incredibly stylized designs for human characters. The short may come off as more cute than funny nowadays, but it was successful enough that it netted Jones an Oscar nomination. It was figured that maybe, just maybe, Jones could do one more UPA-like short to prove it wasn't a fluke.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal.
Released on New Year's Eve, 1955, One Froggy Evening is considered to be Chuck Jones's finest work. The reason why the short is considered such a classic is because it executes such a simple premise so masterfully. A construction worker discovers a live frog who can put on a top hat and cane and do song and dance numbers. The man figures he's hit easy street, but every time he tries to exploit his new talent, the frog turns back into an ordinary frog. And all of this is done through zero dialogue aside from the frog singing.
Come back to wearing my Barney, my Barney.
The short, the last one Jones's unit completed before the shutdown, is a macrocosm of Jones's strength with masterful character animation, strong posing, and humor revolving around hubris that leads to humiliation. And while this one didn't earn him an Oscar nomination, there's plenty of reasons why this is Jones's most well-known short. But with all of his strengths, Jones's oeuvre after the shutdown did end up revealing some of his weaknesses as a creator. Jones had come back to Warner Brothers with most of his unit intact and a $50 a week raise to boot. But the one crucial piece that was missing from his unit after the reopening was Michael Maltese. Maltese had gone on to work at Walter Lance's studio, and after spending a few months working on a freelancer salary, he ended up making more money off Lance's payroll than he did at Warner's. It took some wangling from Jones to negotiate a similar raise to the one he had gotten to bring Maltese back to the studio that August. In the meantime, Jones ended up filling Maltese's position, and this ended up revealing a lot of his worst excesses that Maltese had held in check. Not only were there a lot more UPA-like cartoons that had stories that were not as strong as One Froggy Evening, but now he wanted the stars of Looney Tunes to get on the UPA action. This ended up producing shorts like Bugs' Bonnets, where the conceit is Bugs and Elmer playing different characters throughout the shorts, and Rocket Squad, a straight-faced parody of Dragnet with Daffy and Porky just playing the role of Friday and Smith instead of just being themselves. Jones was ignoring his character's strength and personality by just having them play other roles. Jones's biggest excesses were made especially obvious in the Pepe Le Pew cartoons of this decade. Unlike Maltese, Jones actually sympathized with the character of Pepe, and it resulted in him usually getting Penelope in the end. This can make for some really uneasy rewatches in today's climate.
But now we are inseparable. Are we not, darling?
But even after Maltese came back, Chuck had begun to exercise way more creative control in his own units. Jones believed that his cartoons were successful because of his uncompromising vision, and he needed all of his artists, animators, and writers to follow his lead and be on the same page. And if it meant ruling his studio unit with an iron fist, so be it. Animator Corny Cole talked about coming to near blows with Jones just because he didn't like that Corny drew Daffy not according to his exact specifications. According to Friz Freeling, Chuck Jones had brought one thing into the animation industry, and that was ego. But with or without ego, Chuck Jones still could make a classic short when it counted.
Kill the wabbit, kill the wabbit, kill the wabbit.
Kill the wabbit?
1957's What's Opera Doc is not only considered to be the best Chuck Jones short, but the best Looney Tunes short, period. It is a deliberate marriage between the high art of opera and the low art of theatrical animation, taking the standard Bugs Bunny Elmer Fudd formula and turning it into a 6-minute Wagnerian epic. The setup is comedic, yet Mel Blanc and Arthur Q. Bryan sing all their lines with a dramatic gravity deserving of a dramatic opera.
Oh, Brunhilde, you're so far away.
Yes, I know it. I can't help it.
Both characters dance a beautifully animated ballet across Maurice Noble's landscapes, which are simultaneously abstract and striking. Out of all Chuck Jones's ambitious works, this was the most ambitious of his ambitious works. The short required 6 times the amount of time and money needed compared to the average short produced by Termite Terrace at the time. Even in a time when budgets for shorts were tighter, Chuck Jones had the perfect workaround, in that he completely ignored them. Rabbit of Seville may be the funnier of the opera parodies, but What's Opera Doc represented the culmination of every lesson Chuck and his animators had learned at the studio for the past 2.5 decades. If you can call What's Opera Doc anything, it's Chuck Jones's peak, and by extension, the peak of Termite Terrace's body of work. It would have to be because, around that time, Warner Brothers Animation was getting stiff competition from another brand new invention that was taking America by storm. And though they didn't know it at the time, the good times at Termite Terrace were coming to an end.
Here, you can tune in this wonderful new Westinghouse television set with just one hand like this, because it has the sensational new Westinghouse single dial control.
Well, what did you expect in an opera? A happy ending?
This video was made possible by the good people at Patreon. If you want to support this miniseries, Kyoto Video, or all other future video projects, then click on the link below and join today. You'll get news feeds, early access to videos, maybe even your name in the credits. Each dollar will be going towards making this channel even better. You can also support this channel by liking this video, commenting on it, hitting the subscribe button, hitting that bell button for notifications, and sharing it with all your friends. That's all for now, folks. Thank you for watching.